Hey guys, tonight we begin with something a little less exciting. Instead of sword fights or scandalous monks, we're diving into the endlessly fascinating yet suspiciously vague world of the Akashic Records. You know, the invisible library that stores every thought, action, feeling, and questionable decision you've ever made. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the Soul Tribe check in. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a salt lamp or let your cat sit on your chest like a furry spirit guide, and let's ease into tonight's strange little metaphysical journey together. Congratulations, you've just stumbled into the Akashic Records, and not gracefully either. More like astral tripping over a loose chakra and falling headfirst through a light tunnel that smelled like patchouli and unsaid trauma. You wake up on your back, on a floor that doesn't technically exist, made of something between polished starlight and the regrets of every past life you've ever have finished. Around you stretches an infinite library that somehow manages to look both ancient and aggressively organized. Floating scrolls hum like bees in meditation, golden books shuffle themselves into alphabetical soul order, and crystal spheres blink at you like confused cosmic eyeballs. There's no welcome desk, no friendly librarian, just the overwhelming sensation that you're late to something, and everyone knows it. Your body, if you can even call it that, feels strangely light and uncooperative. You try to sit up, but your arms are more like ideas, now vague suggestions of movement guided by intent and unresolved childhood beliefs. Still, you manage to hover upright, which earns you a subtle nod from a nearby monk-shaped vapor cloud who's apparently been waiting for you since your third lifetime as a potato farmer with abandonment issues. Before you can ask any questions like where you are, what you're supposed to do, or why everything smells faintly of sandalwood and recycled wisdom, a book flaps down from the ceiling like a divine pigeon and smacks you gently in the face. It hovers there, glowing, slightly judgmental. Its cover reads, "The Comprehensive Soul Journey of You, Volume 38. Apparently you've been here before. Many times. But don't worry, you never remember. That's the rule. Every time you die, your consciousness gets drop-kicked back into a body with the spiritual memory of a damp sponge, and every time you return here, you act surprised. It's a whole thing. The records find it adorable. You open the book, or rather, the book opens you. Pages turn themselves, revealing scenes from this life and all the others you swore you'd never repeat. Spoiler, you did. Several times. A distant voice echoes through the hall, calm, cosmic, and slightly annoyed. You're late. You glance up. A figure made entirely of library cards and moonlight stares down at you. Again. So much for first impressions. You haven't even begun reading, and already the Akashic Records have marked you as the slow one. You try to speak, but your words come out like dusty wind and embarrassing astral wheeze that sounds more like a broken harmonium than a coherent question. The librarian, if that's what it even is, just floats there, unimpressed. It gestures towards your shimmering book, which suddenly slams shut like it's had enough of your nonsense. Access denied. It whispers in a voice that sounds suspiciously like your middle school gym teacher. You blink? Confused? Denied? But you're here. You made the trip. You left your physical body snoring in bed and followed all the correct steps. Meditated too hard, fasted for 36 hours, stared into a candle until your third eye begged for mercy. You even lit that overpriced oracle-scented incense, and now you're being spiritually told to come back with a better attitude? The librarian sighs, a sound like the rustling of ancient papyrus dipped in mild disappointment. Your credentials have lapsed. It flicks a hander, maybe a cloud toward, a glowing pedestal nearby. A scroll unfurls itself like a disappointed parent's receipt of your karmic behavior. Across its shimmering surface are terms you've never seen before. Valid ascension codes, energetic consent forms, subconscious alignment score, 43%. At the bottom in glowing red glyphs, Akashic access, temporarily revoked due to spiritual negligence. You want to argue, how could your access be revoked? You've done all the work, at least the parts you understood. You bought the books. You saged your apartment until your neighbor threatened legal action. You even stopped eating processed sugar for 2 whole days. But apparently, none of that counts if you skip the fine print. And the fine print, as you're about to discover, is not just metaphorical. The librarian gestures again, and suddenly you're standing, if standing is even the word in, a waiting room made entirely of rotating mandalas and soft harp music. Other confused souls float nearby, reading outdated brochures like So You Think You're Ready for Cosmic Memory? And the 7 densities of disappointment. A mechanical voice drones from nowhere. Please wait until your access has been spiritually reviewed. Your estimated wait time is 12 lifetimes. You instinctively reach for your phone, but of course there's no phone, there's no time, there's no body. Just a floating sense of guilt and a subtle craving for almond butter. Someone next to you, glowing faintly with second-hand enlightenment, leans over. First time? They ask. You nod. They grin with cosmic exhaustion. Yeah, it gets worse before it gets worse. Before you can respond, the walls flicker and pulse. Your book reappears and hovers nearby like an annoyed bee. A small bookmark juts out from one of the chapters. It reads, Lesson 482. The consequences of skipping meditation to watch reality TV. You look away. Eventually, the librarian returns. Your case is under review. In the meantime, please proceed to the soul audit room. You try to stall, but your feet, which are now more like decisions than limbs, begin moving on their own. You're not ready. Not emotionally, not spiritually, not even metaphysically, and definitely not for what comes next, the dreaded life review. You shuffle into the next room like a child sent to the principal's office, except the principal is time itself and it already knows everything you've done, said, thought, repressed, and tried to justify with spiritual growth. The soul audit room looks exactly how you don't want it to, like a cross between an airport lounge and a DMV, but with more chanting. The walls hum with sacred geometry. The chairs are made of moral ambiguity. The lighting? Pure fluorescent karma. Everything smells like burnt lavender, old sandalwood, and that subtle existential odor of choices you regret but still defend in therapy. A glowing orb hands you a clipboard. Not metaphorically an actual clipboard made of memory and quiet shame. Please verify your soul's signature. It chirps. You blink. My what? It just stares at you. You sign anyway. The pen is a feather dipped in your own unresolved emotions. You take a seat next to a man who appears to be arguing with his past life as a 14th century monk. Across from you, a woman sobs into a scroll titled Unlived Potential, Volume 6. Soft meditation music plays from nowhere, then abruptly switches to Gregorian chanting, then throat singing, then a crystal bowl solo that feels mildly accusatory. You try to relax, but the chair keeps adjusting itself to your worst posture. A voice from the ceiling murmurs, Your current incarnation is being processed for review. Please refrain from interfering with the karma of others while you wait. A screen flickers to life in front of you. It reads, Life Review. Loading. You brace yourself. You've heard about this part. It's where you relive every moment of your current lifetime, from every possible angle. Every word you said. Every feeling you ignored. Every time you ghosted someone because your vibration didn't align. All of it. You see yourself at age 5 crying over a broken toy. At 12 pretending not to care when your best friend ditched you. At 17 making decisions with hormones instead of discernment. Then 23. Saying you were manifesting abundance while actively overdrafting your checking account. But the worst part isn't reliving your own perspective. It's watching how it felt for everyone else. Every eye roll you thought was subtle, every passive-aggressive email, every time you cut someone off in traffic while blasting affirmations through your car stereo. You feel it all. The guilt, the confusion, the hurt, the boredom, the sheer weight of being a human wrapped in spiritual delusion and good intentions. A voice in your head whispers, "This is just the preview." You gulp. At one point, the screen replays a moment when you said, "Everything happens for a reason," to someone going through actual trauma. You feel that now. It's not pleasant. You shift in your chair, which responds by vibrating at a judgmental frequency. The man next to you sighs. "It helps to just surrender to the embarrassment," he says, sipping from a cup that smells like chamomile and karmic debt. The review pauses. A message appears. You have been flagged for minor spiritual bloating. You don't even ask. You're ushered through a new glowing doorway, toward a hallway lined with endless golden doors. You wonder which one leads to peace. Instead, your assigned one reads, Past Life, 783. Goat farmer with spiritual baggage. Of course. 500 words. Full paragraph. Form verified. The door doesn't open so much as it sighs. A soft exhale of light and inevitability that ushers you into what appears to be a private reading room, or at least, that's what the plaque says. It's carved in a dialect you don't recognize, but somehow understand anyway, like an ancient spiritual Yelp review. Quiet souls only. No loud awakenings past 3 a.m. The air here is still and oddly thick, like the kind of silence that follows big decisions or canceled reincarnations. Rows of golden shelves spiral upward into infinity, filled with what must be your soul's documentation volumes of every mood swing, mediocre apology, and ambitious yet unfinished dream. And standing dead center, like he's been waiting since the dawn of your earliest unfinished karma, is your Akashic librarian. He's tall, but not human tall, more like the abstract concept of tall. His robes flow like fog made of wisdom. His facio, the illusion of unease, partially hidden beneath a hood stitched with constellations and regret. His eyes glow faintly, not with menace, but with the exhausting knowledge of your entire multi-dimensional history. He says nothing at first, just looks at you, or maybe through you. You squirm, suddenly aware that you've arrived underprepared, under-enlightened, and slightly overdressed in emotional baggage. "Sit," he says, with a voice like wind through old trees. The chair behind you appears out of nowhere, which is both convenient and deeply unsettling. You sit, as commanded, and try not to fidget. He approaches, pulling a thick tome from the nearest shelf. The cover reads, Soul Evolution, an Ongoing Catastrophe. It hums in his hands, glowing faintly with the light of choices you didn't make and people you forgot to text back. "I am your keeper," he says flatly. "Not of judgment, of memory." You nod slowly, as if you understand what that means. You don't. He places the book in front of you, opens it to a random page, and gestures for you to read. You scan the entry. Age 29. April 12th. 3:14 p.m. Felt sudden inspiration to change career and follow soul calling. Chose instead to watch an entire season of a cooking competition show. Justified decision as resting in the divine feminine. You look up, ashamed. He doesn't react. Patterns, he says, tapping the page. You ignore them in life. Here, we read them. He flips to another entry. This one's a list. Things you promised to heal in this lifetime, and then forgot about. Abandonment issues, need for external validation, resistance to stillness, and an irrational fear of commitment disguised as spiritual independence. Can we skip ahead? You ask. He gives you a look, not angry, just deeply, cosmically disappointed. Everyone wants to skip ahead, he murmurs. That's why no one learns anything. You swallow. The silence is unbearable. And not just because you're being spiritually audited by someone who speaks like a metaphysical IRS agent. It's because you know deep down he's right. You've been running from this stuff for lifetimes. You dressed it up in sage bundles and vision boards, but it's still there. He closes the book with a sound like a soft gong. Before you go further, he says, you'll need to reread your soul contract. You groan internally. Of course there's a contract. And of course, you never read the fine print. The librarian disappears without walking away. One moment he's there in front of you, the next he dissolves like fog into a breeze of silence, leaving you alone with a scroll that drops gently into your hands. It glows faintly, sealed with a wax emblem you don't recognize but somehow feel guilty about. This, apparently, is your soul contract, the sacred agreement you supposedly co-authored with your higher self before being born. You know, back when you had lofty ideas about healing humanity, mastering compassion, and not getting emotionally attached to people who ghost you. The scroll is heavier than expected, and it pulses like it's remembering all the times you didn't follow through on your own promises. You break the seal. Instantly, the scroll unfurls itself like a sentient to-do list with a flair for drama. Pages unravel in midair, stretching longer than feels reasonable, curling around your feet like a paper trail of every choice you forgot was a choice. It's all handwritten, which might sound poetic until you realize the handwriting is yours and it's an absolute mess. Loops and swirls and flourishes that scream overconfidence and sleep deprivation. Certain words glow brighter than others, like they've been edited retroactively with divine sarcasm. At the very top, the title reads, Incarnation Number 1, 907. Emotional alchemy through repetitive mistakes and mild disillusionment. Below that, it's just paragraphs of commitments you apparently made while riding a wave of pre-incarnation optimism. You try to read, but the grammar is confusing and the tone is far too cheerful. You promised to overcome your need for external validation by choosing deeply unavailable partners and calling it spiritual contrast. You agreed to have your intuition ignored repeatedly until you learned to trust it. You even signed off on experiencing a series of gentle ego deaths that, according to this document, would arrive in the form of back-to-back identity crises at pivotal moments in your adult life. About halfway down, the scroll seems to glitch. There are coffee stains, not metaphorical, one actual stains. One section has been scratched out with what looks like divine whiteout, only to be rewritten in smaller, more frantic handwriting that trails off mid-sentence. You realize you signed this while emotionally high on pre-birth idealism. You must have thought Earth would be easy. There are footnotes, tooteny comments from your spirit guides that appear like cosmic sticky notes. One says, you probably shouldn't have insisted on the ambitious growth arc. followed by a drawing of a stick figure falling downstairs labeled Lessons. Another says, "Let's not pretend you didn't ask for the difficult childhood. You wanted character development." You scroll further. At the very bottom, beneath all the glowing ink and vague metaphysical promises, sits your signature bold, unbothered, surrounded by a doodle of a shooting star and what appears to be a flaming question mark. You stare at it, wondering who that version of you even was. Before you can ask, a doorway appears, vibrating slightly with the sound of goat bells and unresolved emotional themes. Its label confirms your suspicion. You're being sent back into one of your past lives. The room beyond smells like hay, damp stone, and an inconvenient lesson you swore you learned already. The door creaks open, not with menace, but with a tired groan of something that's been through this 1,000 times before. Inside, it's dim but not dark. Warm candlelight flickers across a circular chamber filled with what can only be described as spiritual theater seating. Rows and rows of cushioned benches spiral inward toward a glowing platform in the center. You step inside, unsure whether you're supposed to sit, perform, or simply cry quietly in the back row. Before you can decide, the librarian reappears without warning, holding what looks like a remote control made of crystal and consequence. With a flick of his wrist, the entire room hums to life. You are motioned toward the center platform like a contestant in a game show where the prize is self-awareness and the penalty is reliving your worst moments in full multi-angle playback. You obey, heart already shrinking. A screen unfolds above you, stitched together from memory and mild embarrassment. The lights dim. The review begins. You're watching yourself, but it's not just memory, it's immersive. You see your life not only from your own eyes, but also from the perspectives of everyone around you. You're 10 years old, interrupting your friend's confession with a louder story of your own. You're 19, half listening to someone talk about their heartbreak while you check your phone. You're 27, telling someone you're not ready for a relationship, even though what you really mean is you don't want to grow. Each moment lands like a spiritual paper cut. You wince, and then it gets worse. You see, every time you had the chance to choose compassion and chose comfort instead. Every moment you told yourself you were being spiritually aligned, when really, you were just scared. Every time you waited for a sign instead of admitting you already knew. The audience, mostly blurry figures that vaguely resemble your soul group, make soft noises. Some sigh. One groans. Someone in the back whispers, "Oh, not this part again." You can't tell if they're disappointed in you or just tired of the reruns. Either way, the screen presses on. Eventually, the playback slows. You're shown a particular past life you didn't even know you had. You're a middle-aged man in a tiny village, herding goats with what seems like chronic resentment. You wear a tunic that smells like mildew and carry the exact same emotional avoidance issues you thought were unique to your current incarnation. You were supposed to be a mystic, a healer, someone who passed on wisdom. But instead, you spent your days muttering about how no one understands you and convincing yourself that your spiritual awakening would happen next season. The final scene shows you staring into the distance, clutching a carved wooden charm you never figured out how to use, whispering, "Maybe next time." The screen fades. The lights return. The librarian doesn't say anything, which somehow feels worse than if he had. You're left standing on the glowing platform, heavy with the weight of repetition. You don't need a summary. The lesson is clear. You've done this before. The avoidance, the excuses, the spiritual vocabulary wrapped around the same old fear. It wasn't special then, and it isn't now. A quiet chime rings through the room. The door to your next phase opens slowly. It smells like hay, dirt, and ego denial. The doorway opens with a groan like it's tired of watching you relearn the same soul lesson for the 12th time. On the other side, it's early morning. The year is 1172, and everything smells like damp wool, burning peat, and poor choices. You're barefoot. Of course you are. Your feet are already freezing and covered in mud, even though you just arrived. The sky is gray, the grass is wet, and somewhere nearby a goat is already screaming like it knows you're about to disappoint another spiritual mentor. You glance down at your clothes, somewhere between potato sack and homespun shame. Your hands are calloused, your back aches. You are, without a doubt, a full-time goat farmer with absolutely zero interest in facing your divine purpose. Again, your cottage is small, cramped. One room, stone walls, a dirt floor, and a smell that can only be described as generational funk. A wooden charm hangs from the ceiling, something someone once gave you for protection, but you can't remember who or why. Most mornings, you step outside, grunt at the horizon, and begin a full day of not doing the one thing you're here to do. You were meant to be a village mystic. That was the contract. You were supposed to heal, guide, interpret dreams, and help people find meaning in the chaos. Instead, you collect dung for fuel and mumble to yourself about how people don't really want to heal anyway. You mutter that phrase a lot. It becomes your mantra, your spiritual excuse for doing nothing. Your goats, incidentally, are more spiritually aligned than you. They eat, they rest, they fight when necessary. They don't journal about it afterward or overthink their past incarnations. You envy them. You spend hours pretending you're too busy to begin your sacred practice, telling the villagers you're still in training, though no one remembers who trained you. Your inner knowing tells you to make medicine, carve symbols, offer guidance, but your fear whispers louder, so you stay busy. You stay resentful. You stare at the stars at night and tell them, with great spiritual authority, that you'll try again in your next life. There's one particularly awkward flashback. You're in your late 30s, sitting in the forest with an eager young woman who has come to you for advice. She says she dreams of fire, birds, and a staircase that never ends. You tell her, flatly, that it probably means she has indigestion. Then you send her away and spend the rest of the day pretending that wasn't the most accurate spiritual dream you've ever heard. She leaves disappointed. You feel a flicker of shame. You push it down with a heavy meal and a nap you justify as intuitive rest. By the time you die in that life, your journal contains more drawings of goats than sacred insight. You whisper something dramatic with your final breath, like, "It wasn't the right life," which sounds wise but is actually just another excuse. Back in the records room, the orb showing this memory dims. The librarian appears again, as usual, without footsteps. He simply raises one translucent brow, then gestures toward another door. You've seen enough of your old procrastinations. It's time to remember how the records themselves respond when you start asking questions. You step back into the hallway of the records, with the heavy weight of goat dung and wasted destiny still clinging to your aura. The air here is too clean now, too silent, like it's daring you to make another excuse. The librarian is gone, as usual, just vanished into the metaphysical woodwork. In his place floats a book, large and glowing, pulsing with the quiet arrogance of something that already knows you're going to get confused again. You approach slowly, warily, like it might explode if you open it too quickly. It doesn't. Instead, it drifts open with a gentle flutter, landing on a page labeled Soul Lesson Integration, Inquiry Phase. Below it is a soft invitation written in that elegant Akashic calligraphy. Ask whatever you wish. You pause. That seems too generous. You glance around. Nothing moves. The book waits, so tentatively you speak. Why did I keep avoiding my purpose? The pages rustle slightly. A low, playful sound comes from somewhere between the book and the air around it. It sounds like giggling, not mocking, not cruel, just the kind of laugh someone makes when watching a child ask if clouds are edible. You frown. I'm being serious. More giggling. The book flips to a page on its own. You read, Lesson 17. You weren't ready to stop hiding. That's not a judgment. That's a pattern. You want to argue but can't. Not because it's not fair, but because it's annoyingly accurate. You try again. What am I supposed to be doing now? The book flips again, this time slower, more like a shrug than a response. The page it lands on reads, Same thing you were supposed to be doing last time. Listening. Then below it, smaller text. Without planning a podcast about it first, you feel called out. Deeply. You glance up. Can I speak to someone? Another giggle. The book closes slightly, then opens to a page labeled Contact Attempts, Frequently Asked Frustrations. It lists a variety of common complaints, including, Why don't I hear my guides? Is this all in my head? Why do I get nothing during meditation but shopping lists? Each one is followed by the same small response, because you keep expecting answers to come in the shape of your preferences. You sigh. You sit down. You try again. What's the meaning of all of this? For a moment, the room darkens. The book closes. You think maybe it's over. But then it reopens to a single blank page. A sentence begins to form slowly, as if being written just for you. You keep asking what it means, but you haven't spent enough time feeling what it is. You don't laugh this time. The giggling is gone. You feel the weight of that one. And yet there's no drama to it. No lightning, no thunder, just stillness. And then, from the edge of the book, a final note appears in a curled flourish of ink. It's okay not to get it all right now, but maybe stop pretending you don't know anything at all. You close your eyes. Somewhere behind you, a new hallway lights up. The next section, the deeper layers. You get up, and as you do, you hear it again, the softest laugh. Not at you, with you. Maybe the records aren't being mean. Maybe they're just patient. The next hallway doesn't shimmer or hum. It just waits, quiet and beige, like the cosmic equivalent of a dentist's office. No radiant sigils, no floating mandalas, just a slightly scuffed floor and that faint smell of old parchment and mild disapproval. You step through anyway, because that's what this place does. It nudges you forward just when you're beginning to think about turning back. At the end of the hall is a desk, a single desk. Empty, except for a small placard that reads Returns Exchanges. You stare at it for a long time. The moment feels suspicious, like a trap disguised as customer service. You approach cautiously. No one's sitting behind the desk, but a little bell rests there, old and tarnished, next to a stack of celestial paperwork that looks disturbingly similar to the soul contract you just read. You hesitate, then ring the bell. Nothing happens. You ring it again, a little harder this time. The air behind the desk ripples, and then a figure appears slowly materializing like a barista made of fog and bureaucratic enlightenment. She's wearing glasses that don't seem to rest on anything, and her hair glows faintly, like it's powered by unresolved soul fragments. Name? She asks without looking up. You tell her. She types it into a device that looks like a typewriter, and a crystal ball had a deeply disappointed child. Department? She continues. You pause. Spiritual development? She smirks faintly and mutters, Aren't they all? Before flipping open a file labeled with your name and what must be the emotional equivalent of a warning label. She scans it, frowns, and taps her fingers on the page. And what exactly are you trying to return today? She asks flatly. You fidget. I don't know. This lifetime's lesson? Her eyebrow lifts like a curtain, unveiling a very unimpressed show. Be specific, she says. We've had a lot of people trying to return humility this cycle. It's not eligible. You take a breath. Maybe the part where I agreed to feel everything. Could I swap that for something less intense? Like moderate curiosity or maybe emotional numbness with a spiritual twist? She sighs the way only someone who's processed too many incarnations can sigh. Soul lessons, she says slowly, are non-refundable, non-transferable, and non-negotiable. You accepted them freely and with full enthusiasm while completely underestimating how inconvenient they would feel in practice. The agreement is binding. You open your mouth to object, but she cuts you off. Even the part about loneliness, she says, pointing to a line in your file. You literally requested it. You said, and I quote, It'll make me stronger and deepen my connection to Source. You close your mouth. After a moment, she softens. Just a little. Look, it's not that we don't sympathize. It's just that everyone thinks they're the exception, that their lesson is unusually hard, that their burden is a cosmic clerical error. It's not. This place is run by rhythm, not randomness. You get what you came for, even when you forget why. She stamps your file with a glowing seal and slides it back into the aether. Next, she says gently, you take the hint and step away. No refund, no trade-in. Just you and the weight of what you once thought you could handle better. A nearby doorway creaks open, leading to the next area. The sign above it reads, Karma Department. Please watch your step. You step through the door and are immediately hit with the scent of burning incense and something suspiciously like printer toner. The room is vast, lined with floating ledgers that shimmer between dimensions, each one keeping an obsessive record of some soul's every action, intention, and inconvenient mood swing. A large screen flickers above the entryway, displaying the words Karmic Balance Sheet, updated in real time. There's even a logo in the corner that looks alarmingly corporate, a golden infinity symbol with a stylized feather passing through the middle. A voice overhead chimes in, pleasant but robotic. Welcome to the Karma Department. Please remain spiritually accountable at all times. A figure in a glowing beige suit approaches you, holding a clipboard and looking vaguely annoyed. Name and incarnation number? They ask. You give your name. They squint. Which one? You sigh and give them your most recent Earth version. They nod, flip through translucent sheets, and then gesture toward a station labeled Auditing. You sit in front of what resembles a cosmic ATM, except it's scanning your aura and projecting your current karmic score in glowing letters above your head. A number appears. It's not flattering. You stare. That's lower than I expected. The attendant doesn't flinch. That's common. Most people think karma only counts when they're aware of it. Unfortunately, the system tracks motives, not performance. Also, loopholes don't count. You shift uncomfortably as the machine spits out a karmic report. It's several pages long. The headings include debts owed to former rivals, acts of passive, aggressive enlightenment, and lessons postponed, due to fear masquerading as humility. You read through them slowly, horrified to discover that karmic interest is apparently real. That time you ghosted someone because you needed space to heal? Yeah, that accrued. Is this fixable? You ask. The attendant sighs, pulls up a holographic bar chart, and explains that karma isn't punishment, it's architecture. Think of it like spiritual scaffolding, they say. Not moral, just instructional. Every action adjusts the structure. Kindness without expectation lifts it. Fear drops it. Self-awareness strengthens it. Denial wraps it in duct tape. You nod slowly, pretending to understand as the chart fluctuates in real time with your current thought patterns. You watch as your karmic credit dips slightly when you internally judge the person next to you for being too spiritually smug. A side screen lights up, showing your karmic trends over lifetimes. There's a peak in ancient Greece, a nosedive during the early 1500s, a flat line in 1974 when you apparently just stopped trying. Can I pay anything off now? You ask, a little desperate. The attendant looks up. Of course. Forgive someone. Accept discomfort without resistance. Be honest when it's inconvenient. Or, they pause. Stop treating your spiritual path like a performance review. The machine beeps. A new receipt prints. At the bottom, in bold glowing ink, it reads, "Karma is not a punishment. It's a GPS rerouting you every time you pretend you're lost." You fold the receipt and place it in your pocket, even though you know it'll disappear by the next hallway. The next door opens automatically. It's round, familiar. It smells faintly like déjà vu and unresolved family dynamics. The next room isn't a room at all. It's more like a wide open field, stretching into a horizon that doesn't quite settle. The grass is golden, the sky flickers between colors, and there are mirrors, hundreds of them scattered across the land like spiritual landmines. Some are tall and regal like cathedral windows. Others are cracked, dusty, tilted at odd angles. You take a hesitant step forward, and the nearest mirror lights up, displaying the face of your ex from 3 relationships ago. You freeze. The mirror doesn't just show their face, it replays the exact moment they told you that you're a little too much. You hear your own response, the anger in your voice, the way you rolled your eyes and stormed out pretending you were over it. The mirror pulses. A message appears. Reflection detected. Emotional pattern incomplete. You look away quickly and walk toward another mirror, hoping for something gentler. This one shows your 5th grade teacher. You barely remember her, but there she is, telling you that you talk too much, that you should stop asking weird questions and just follow the rules. Behind her voice, you hear your childhood self trying to shrink. The mirror hums and displays a phrase, "Silencing wound, still active." You clench your jaw. "These aren't me," you mutter. But the wind picks up and whispers, "They're the parts of you you abandoned." You walk further, trying not to make eye contact with the reflections that keep popping up. The friend who ghosted you after you cried too hard. The coworker who called you controlling. The stranger who looked at you like you were broken. All of them appear, flicker, and fade. Each mirror leaves behind a single word hovering in the air. Projection. You sit down in the grass, defeated. "So what?" you ask the air. "Everyone in my life was just a mirror for my own dysfunction." The mirrors shudder slightly, like they're holding in a laugh. It's not that simple, of course. The mirrors don't just reflect wounds. Some show your joy. The people who loved you deeply. The ones who saw you before you saw yourself. The mentors who gave without keeping score. These reflections glow softer, warmer. You start to realize it's not about blame. It's about resonance. Every person you've met held something you weren't ready to hold alone. A fear, a gift, a shadow, a pattern. The mirrors weren't judging you. They were just showing you where the light got stuck. A particularly large mirror rolls forward on its own, revealing a version of you not past, not future, just raw, unarmored presence. You stare at it. They stare back. You ask, quietly, "Why do I always forget this?" And the mirror answers not in words, but in feeling. Because remembering is the work. Because forgetting is part of the cycle. Because without the contrast, you wouldn't recognize yourself at all. The mirror tilts, revealing a new path behind it, a narrow staircase winding downward into mist. A small sign appears, hovering above the steps. Next phase, emotional debt collection. You sigh, stand up, and begin the descent. The staircase is narrow and damp, lit by floating orbs that glow just enough to make sure you can't pretend not to see where you're going. Each step creaks not under your feet, but in your memory. As you descend, faint echoes of voices trail behind you. Not dramatic ones, just the subtle, unfinished kind. "I didn't mean it like that. You never said goodbye. I needed you to be different." The air thickens. Your chest tightens. This is the part of the Akashic Records they don't sell as a guided meditation. This is the emotional debt floor where all the unresolved interactions, the swallowed words, and quiet grudges have been filed away with uncomfortable accuracy. You reach the bottom and find yourself in a low-lit room filled with numbered doors. Each one has a name on it. You recognize them all. You open the first door. It's your old friend from high school, the one you drifted from after they made one too many offhand comments about your weird spiritual stuff. Inside, there's no person, just a feeling. The exact sensation of sitting across from them at lunch, trying to explain your first awakening while they laughed and changed the subject. It stings. Not because they were cruel, but because you never told them how much that moment shrank you. You thought you forgave them. But you didn't. You just buried it under spiritual maturity. The room hums softly, acknowledging the debt. You leave the door open and move on. The next few rooms blur together. An old partner you never truly forgave for not becoming the person you believed they could be. A parent who meant well but said all the wrong things. A teacher who mocked your curiosity. A coworker who stole your idea and smiled about it. Each room doesn't accuse you. It just offers you the chance to finally admit what you never said. That hurt. I wanted more. You let me down. The air in each space changes slightly as you speak. It becomes lighter, not erased, just aired out. One room surprises you. It has your own name on it. Inside is a version of you from years ago, sitting cross-legged on the floor, sobbing quietly into a hoodie sleeve. You know the moment instantly. It's that one night you told yourself to suck it up, to get over it, to be strong when what you really needed was permission to collapse. You never forgave yourself for being that fragile, for being that human. The room doesn't ask anything of you except this. Can you sit with them now? You do, for a while, and something in your chest unclenches. Eventually, the hallway ends. A new door appears, much larger than the others. This one doesn't have a name, just a phrase etched in golden script. All is forgiven once it's understood. You don't knock. It opens for you. Inside is not a person, but a feeling. Completion, not perfection. Just the sense that maybe you can stop carrying people like unfinished business. A final message echoes softly as you step through. Resentment is just memory, waiting to be held differently. Ahead, a new corridor opens glowing with soft blues and humming tones. A place of remembrance. The corridor ahead hums like a lullaby sung through crystal. It smells faintly of lavender and stardust stone, of those scents you can't quite place but you're certain you've known before. The walls here pulse gently, not with light, but with memory. Not yours exactly, but close. As you walk, scenes flicker across the stone like dreams that almost stayed with you in the morning. A familiar face here, a conversation you half remember, a touch that never happened in waking life but still changed you. This is the dreaming floor. Not the kind you visit when your brain decompresses, but the kind your soul uses when the ego finally shuts up long enough to listen. A bench appears beside you. You sit, not because you're tired, but because the air seems to insist that you pause. Across from you is a screen. It turns on without a click or flash, just the smooth unveiling of old dreams you never knew were real. The first one plays out softly. You're standing in a hallway much like this one, talking to someone whose face is blurred, but whose presence is unmistakably soothing. You called them guide in the dream. Or maybe friend. Or maybe just you again. You asked them what you were supposed to be doing with your life, and they smiled in that maddeningly cryptic way, saying, "You're already doing it." But you keep forgetting. You woke up that morning and laughed at the nonsense. But here, it plays like gospel. Another dream. This one more vivid. You're lost in a city that feels like an emotional IKEA familiar layouts, but no idea how to get out. A child appears and offers you a map. It's not written in words, but in feelings. You take it anyway. In the dream, you followed it until you found a quiet temple with your own name carved above the door. You thought it was just your subconscious being dramatic, but now you understand. It was your soul showing you where you left pieces of yourself. And the child? Likely a version of you from another life, guiding you home without needing credit. The screen fades, and a wall of portraits appears soft, glowing outlines of people you've seen 100 times in your dreams but can't find in your waking life. Some were lovers who never manifested. Others were teachers who said one thing and then disappeared. A few were strangers whose presence left you rattled for days. The records confirm it now. These were not accidents. These were reunions. Rehearsals, reminders. The dreaming realm is not imagination, it's orientation. Every person you see there is a lighthouse trying to help you remember what your conscious mind keeps pushing aside. Who you were. What you knew. Why you came. You rise from the bench. The hallway begins to dissolve a not like it's ending, but like it's becoming less necessary. Ahead is a doorway made entirely of mist and music. You walk toward it, already sensing what comes next. The voices you've heard in dreams, the symbols that keep showing up, the strange repeating numbers, they weren't glitches. They were echoes. The next sign floats beside the door, written in silver light. Your soul has been trying to text you back for years. The mist curls around you like a half-forgotten melody as you step through the doorway. It doesn't part so much as it listens, like it's waiting for you to admit something to yourself before it clears. And maybe it already knows what that something is. Because as the vapor thins, you're standing in a circular chamber filled with tiny glowing orbs, each one hovering silently in the air like a paused notification. You recognize the feeling before the thought. These are soul messages. Every gut feeling you dismissed, every strange synchronicity you brushed off as coincidence, every tug in your chest you explained away with logic archived here. Still waiting, still valid. The room hums gently, like it's alive but patient. One orb drifts toward you and expands. Inside it plays a memory. Not flashy, not mystical, just a Tuesday afternoon when you felt inexplicably sad walking past a certain street corner. You remember brushing it off, texting someone something funny to distract yourself. But watching it now, you see what you missed, That corner was the same place your energy first fractured during a heartbreak you never gave yourself time to grieve. The sadness wasn't random. It was a breadcrumb. Another orb floats forward. This one shows a moment from last year when you woke up from a nap and couldn't shake the image of a key and a red door. You told someone about it and they said, "Weird dream," and you agreed and forgot. But the records didn't. That door was from another life one where you chose safety over truth. The key was this life's reminder that the lock was still waiting. That's the thing about your soul. It doesn't shout. It just repeats itself quietly until you finally get curious enough to listen. You move slowly around the room as more orbs light up, strange encounters, flashes of insight, lyrics that made you cry for no reason. You remember the moment you almost turned down that job because something didn't feel right, but you did it anyway and paid the price in slow soul erosion. You remember the time you felt drawn to a book for no clear reason and later found out it had a passage that described exactly what you were going through. These weren't random. These were pings. Subtle messages from the quiet part of you that still believes you'll choose alignment over approval. Eventually, you reach the center of the room. One orb remains. It doesn't glow. It burns softly, like a candle. You touch it, and it simply whispers, "You were never lost. You were just overwhelmed." The words dissolve into warmth. The room sighs around you, as if exhaling the breath you've been holding for years. And then, without drama, the orbs begin to fade not because they're gone, but because you finally heard them. A path opens behind you, lined with gentle light and the smell of something ancient like cedar and rain. The next part won't be about messages. It'll be about the memories that shaped why you stopped listening in the first place. The corridor ahead is narrower now, almost claustrophobic, like a winding alley of the soul. The lights here don't shine, they flicker. Not out of neglect, but because the memories stored in this section are unstable, raw. You walk slowly, as if your presence alone might disturb something sacred. The walls feel closer with each step, pressing in like a truth you've avoided for too long. Then the hallway stops not at a door, but at a mirror. This one is different. It doesn't show your face. It shows the moment everything shifted. You don't remember it clearly. Not yet. But your body does. That tightening in your stomach. That moment when the world didn't protect you the way you thought it would. Maybe it was a betrayal. Maybe it was a loss. Maybe it was just silence when you begged for a sign. The mirror pulses softly and begins to replay it not to punish you, but to finally let you see it as it was. You watched yourself smaller, younger, more trusting. You had asked the universe for something back then. Maybe not with words, maybe just with hope, a sign that life was on your side. That something was listening, and what you got instead was pain, or abandonment, or nothing at all. The air goes still. The mirror doesn't blink. You feel the weight of the moment like a hand pressed against your ribs. This is when it happened. When you started saying everything happens for a reason, but stopped believing it. When you started performing trust instead of living it. You didn't become cynical overnight. You just learned that hope could hurt. So you shrank your dreams, filtered your intuition through doubt, and called it maturity. You told yourself the universe was still wise, still loving, but somewhere deep inside, you started keeping score, and it never added up. The mirror ripples and reveals your response in the years that followed, how you spiritualized your numbness, how you filled the space with goals and mantras, and just enough meditation to avoid asking the real question, why didn't I feel protected? The records don't answer that. Not yet, because it's not about blame. It's about repair, about standing here now, in front of this memory, and finally letting yourself admit what you couldn't then. That you felt betrayed. That it didn't make sense. That the universe felt silent when you needed it to speak. And in that admission, something softens. The light in the mirror steadies. The image fades. And behind the glass, you catch a glimpse of something unexpected. Your soul, still whole, still intact, still radiant. It had never left. It had simply stepped back when your pain filled the space. The mirror doesn't promise answers, but it does offer an invitation. Can you trust again? Even if you were hurt while trusting? Behind you, the corridor expands again. The walls pull back. The ceiling opens to a vast sky painted with soft stars. The air feels easier to breathe. The past doesn't press as hard. A floating archway appears in the distance, etched with golden light. It reads, "The only way forward is through the original light." You step beneath the golden arch and are immediately enveloped in a silence that isn't empty, it's restorative. Not the silence of absence, but the kind that wraps around you like warm linen and lets your nervous system stop bracing for the next metaphysical shoe to drop. The floor here is soft, more like sand than stone, and it glows faintly with a light that seems to come from beneath your own feet. You realize it's not lighting the path, it's reacting to your presence. Every step illuminates, not because of where you're going, but because you are the one walking. Above you is a ceiling made of moving light, shapes, symbols, fragments of dreams you barely remember, shimmer there, some of them beautiful, some of them weirdly embarrassing, like that one time you tried to manifest confidence, but ended up with mild spiritual superiority. The air smells like jasmine and wood smoke, familiar and unfamiliar all at once. This is the sanctuary of the light you forgot, the light you once carried so boldly, before life told you to dim it down in the name of practicality, safety, or being easy to be around. A structure rises in the center of the space, like a pulsing cocoon made of translucent gold thread. You approach it, unsure of whether it's safe or sacred or both. As you draw near, the cocoon responds. It peels open slowly, revealing not an object or a being, but an energy. It hovers, then it sinks into you. No blinding fanfare, no angelic chorus. Just a quiet click, like a drawer sliding into place after being left ajar for years. The sensation is strange not like gaining something new, but like recovering a piece you forgot was always yours. It's warmth, not from outside, but from within. A kind of steady glow that doesn't demand attention but refuses to be denied. You remember now vaguely, achingly, what it felt like to move through life before you learned to brace, to create without worrying if it would be received, to speak without editing for spiritual digestibility, to exist without explaining why. That light never died. It just went underground, buried beneath the rubble of well-meaning advice, chronic overthinking, and the thousand small ways you learned to make yourself digestible. The room pulses with a new rhythm now, sinking to you. You don't feel fixed. You feel found. You still remember everything that hurt, but the story is no longer sharp-edged. It's a path, not a prison. You realize survival mode didn't hide the light to punish you. It did so to protect what was most sacred until you were ready to hold it again without dropping it. A new hallway opens, not straight this time, but winding. Curved like a spiral, like DNA or galaxies or learning. You begin walking again, the light now glowing steadily under your skin. You don't need to announce it. You don't even need to understand it. You just need to keep going. Ahead, a whisper floats through the air. The ancestors have been watching this whole time. They're ready now. The spiral hallway winds slowly, like a thought you're almost ready to admit. With every curve, the air thickens not with fear, but with presence. There's something ancient here. Not dusty or forgotten, but alive, waiting. The walls shift from gold to deep earth tones, textured like stone soaked in memory. You notice small carvings as you walk, symbols you've seen in dreams, on old pages, maybe even in tattoos you once got without fully knowing why. You turn a corner, and there they are, not statues, not ghosts, just presences, rows of them standing in silence, watching, not judging, just waiting for you to arrive. These are your ancestors, not just the ones tied to your blood, but the ones tied to your soul. You recognize none of their faces and all of their eyes. Some are draped in animal hides, others in ceremonial robes made of stars. One wears a hoodie and bare feet and hums a tune that sounds suspiciously like something from a mixtape you burned in high school. Time doesn't apply here. Neither does logic. These are the ones who made it through their own initiations barely, beautifully, and chose to stick around on the other side to make sure you didn't lose your way completely. You take a tentative step forward, unsure of what's expected, but nothing happens. No scroll appears, no dramatic speech. Instead, one of them simply tilts their head, as if saying, "Finally." Another one steps forward. They reach into the folds of their robe and hand you a mirror. Not a glowing magical artifact, just a simple, worn mirror. You stare into it and see yourself, not your current self, not a past self, but the version of you that kept going when it didn't make sense to. The you that survived things nobody clapped for. The you that loved anyway. The you that cracked but never lost the signal entirely. You've met yourself again, and the ancestors nod. One of them speaks finally. Their voice is layered, like thunder braided with lullabies. "We were never waiting for you to finish healing," they say. "We were waiting for you to stop pretending you needed to." You blink, unsure how to respond. "Closure," they continue, "is a myth. There is only integration and remembering. The silence that follows isn't awkward. It's reverent." They lead you to a small fire in the center of the space. It doesn't burn. It sings. Soft tones rise and fall like a language you haven't quite learned but still understand. They motion for you to sit. You do. Around the fire are objects: a thread, a feather, a broken coin, a dried flower. One ancestor whispers what they mean. The promises you made before this life, the things you traded, the beauty you left behind, the softness you thought you had to earn. You sit there a while. The fire doesn't warm your skin, it warms your memory. It reminds you that lineage isn't just biology, it's spirit. The lives you're living now, are their prayers being answered slowly, imperfectly, but with love. And they never needed you to be perfect, just present. The fire flares once, briefly, then softens again. A path opens to your left, carved into stone. A breeze flows through it, carrying the scent of myrrh and rain. A message appears in the flames. It's time to remember the truth before language. The stone path is narrower here, as if asking you to walk slower, more deliberately. It curves gently downward, not ominously, but like the descent into sleep just before dreaming takes over. The further you go, the less things make literal sense. The torches lining the wall emit no flame, only low pulses of emotion. The symbols carved into the walls aren't in any alphabet you recognize, yet you somehow know their meaning. You don't read them, you feel them. They speak to the part of you that existed before phonics, before grammar, before you learned how to say things in ways that made others comfortable. This is the chamber of pre-language, the original temple of meaning. The floor beneath your feet shifts from stone to something softer, something that feels like woven memory. The air is thicker here, saturated with presence. This is the place where thought isn't separate from sensation. You begin to remember, not as facts, but as feelings. The way the sky felt before you had a word for blue. The ache of a loss you knew as a child, but didn't know how to name. The quiet thrill of sensing someone's energy long before they spoke. These weren't just memories. They were messages. You've always been fluent in energy, you just forgot when you started prioritizing correct answers over true ones. At the center of the room is a pool of water. But it's not just water. It's reflective, alive, almost humming. You kneel beside it and gaze into the surface. It doesn't show your face. It shows moments when you spoke the unspoken. The time you held someone's hand and calmed their grief without saying a word. The look you gave a stranger that told them they weren't invisible. The gut instinct that saved you from stepping into something misaligned. These were not accidents. They were fragments of a language you still know one built on resonance instead of articulation. From the far corner of the chamber, a sound rises, not quite music, not quite voice. It's the tonal language of dreams. You recognize it, not because you understand it intellectually, but because your nervous system exhales in response. You've heard this before, between sleep cycles, in the spaces between thoughts. You remember a time, maybe in another life, maybe before any of them, when communication wasn't about getting a point across. It was about vibration, synchrony, a mutual recognition of what is. The pool begins to ripple gently. Symbols rise from its surface and hover in the air before dissolving into mist. One lingers longer than the other, spiral inside a circle wrapped in a halo of gold. You don't know what it's called, but you know exactly what it means. You are always being spoken to, even in silence. The air shifts again. A soft doorway opens ahead, shaped not by architecture, but by intent. It's time to leave the pre-verbal behind, but not forget it. The world you're returning to is built on language, but now you carry the original one inside you, the one that listens deeper than the ears. A final whisper floats from the pool. When the words fail you, hum the truth. You step through the doorway made of intention, and the air immediately changes. It's not heavier, exactly just more honest. Gone are the flickering lights and theatrical mysticism. This space is quieter, plainer, almost disappointingly so at first glance. A circular room with walls of soft clay, dimly lit by a gentle glow that seems to come from nowhere. There are no scrolls, no tablets, no golden books with embossed covers. Just an open floor and a small woven mat in the center. It feels like a waiting room, but not for something external, for yourself. You sit, and the moment you do, something inside you flickers, not a thought, but a sensation, a memory, maybe, or the prelude to one. It begins in your chest and expands like a quiet wave, not urgent, not dramatic. Just a soft opening. Your eyes close not because you intend to meditate, but because the body knows when to go inward. This is the true Akashic access point. Not a reading room, but a remembering field. You realize now that the idea of reading the records was always a mistranslation. They were never meant to be browsed like a database. They were always a living resonancia, library of frequency stored in the tissue of your being. You sit in silence, and instead of images or visions, you feel. First, it's just a low thrum like the sound the earth makes if you lie still long enough on a mossy forest floor. Then, memories begin to emerge, not like flashbacks, but like flavors. You taste a place you've never been. You feel the grief of someone you once were, their longing like a note held too long in the chest. There's a joy, too, sharp and pure, from a lifetime where your only job was to ring bells at sunrise. These aren't stories with plots. They're feelings with roots, and they're yours. A warmth spreads across your palms. You lift your hands and notice they're lightly glowing, not with light, but with recognition. Your body is responding to what it knows, not what it was told, not what it studied, what it remembers. The Akashic Records aren't external files. They're emotional imprints encoded into the field of the soul. You don't unlock them with effort. You soften into them with permission. Around you, the room begins to change physically, but energetically. It feels less like a chamber and more like a presence, like a vast intelligence leaning close, not to instruct, but to witness. You remember that time you walked away from something that looked perfect but felt wrong. That moment wasn't logic. It was Akashic memory rising in your body to redirect you. And you listened. That was the records at work, not with thunder, but with intuition. A single phrase settles into your awareness not from above, but from within. Feeling is the first language. Trust it before you translate it. You open your eyes, but you're not really back. You're simply clearer, more here. Ahead, a wide path opens. It's not paved, it's not lit, but your chest leans toward it like it knows the way. The path ahead doesn't sparkle, it doesn't shout. It hums slow, steady, barely detectable unless you've learned to feel with your feet. With every step, you're reminded how much of life you've been trying to make sense of with the wrong tools. There was a time, not long ago, when you'd see a feather on the sidewalk and immediately check Google for feather spiritual meaning. You'd see repeating numbers on license plates and rush to online angel number guides, hungry for confirmation that you weren't alone, that the universe had noticed you. And while none of that was wrong, it was always a translation of a much older language one your nervous system knew before your mind learned to panic its way into understanding. You walk now with fewer questions, not because you suddenly know everything, but because you're finally listening with more than your ears. The path curves, and the environment around you changes. Trees begin to appear strange, crystalline things that shimmer not in color, but in tone. One tree glows faintly, with the same frequency as that recurring dream you kept having as a child, the one with the boat and the storm and the red sky. Another hums a vibration that makes your throat tighten not from fear, but from recognition. It matches the feeling you always get when someone lies to you and you pretend not to notice. These trees don't speak. They resonate. And that's the lesson you're being led into. Signs don't speak in words. They ring. You sit beneath one of the trees, not because you're tired, but because you feel called to stay a while. A breeze moves through the space, and it's not carrying messages, it is the message. A reminder that some things are meant to be absorbed, not analyzed. For so long, you tried to turn your spiritual experiences into puzzles to be solved, as if clarity was earned through mental gymnastics. As if the universe were some cryptic professor handing out riddles instead of love. But here, now, you feel it. The signs were never codes, they were chords, and you were always meant to feel them vibrate through your bones before you ever tried to give them meaning. You remember, all at once, 100 small moments feeling pulled to talk to someone for no good reason. An unease about a place you couldn't explain, a sudden peace when you entered a room. You chalked them up to coincidence, mood, anxiety. But they weren't random. They were resonance, invitations to trust your inner tuning fork instead of your inner critic. You realize now that intuition isn't a gift, it's a frequency, and you've always been dialed in. You just kept turning the volume down to hear what others thought was true. The tree beside you pulses once, sending a warm thrum through the ground beneath you. Not a command, Not a revelation, just a nudge. You already know. Stop asking for permission to feel what you feel. You rise without needing to explain yourself to yourself. A glowing archway appears ahead, simple and silent. A new kind of sign, not one to interpret, but one to enter. You step through the archway and immediately feel the difference. The air doesn't buzz here. It waits, still. Not because nothing's happening, but because you are what's happening. The room is circular again, echoing the spaces you've been passing through for what feels like lifetimes. Only this one is empty. No lights, no trees, no flames, just you. And your habit of needing certainty before allowing wonder. The stillness is almost uncomfortable. You keep expecting something to activate, some external cue to say, yes, you're doing this right. But nothing comes. Because this is the place where you learn how often your need for proof was the very thing blocking the thing you were trying to prove. You sit down because there's nothing else to do, and that's when the first memory hits. Not a grand revelation. Just the subtle ache of all the times you said, if this is real, give me a sign, and then dismiss the sign because it came too fast, too easy, too unexplainable. You remember the time you pulled a tarot card that made your heart race, but you reshuffled because you weren't sure the deck was properly cleansed. You remember the whisper you heard once while falling asleep, gentle, loving, unmistakably not your voice, and how you laughed it off as a dream. You demanded the universe speak louder. It refused, not out of cruelty, but out of respect. You see now that you weren't just asking for signs. You were asking for permission to trust your own experience. You were terrified of being wrong, of making it all up, of becoming one of those people. So instead of feeling your way into truth, you built entire rituals around needing to be convinced. Every crystal, every incense stick, every full moon ceremony wasn't inherently wrong, but you often use them as conditions, as if the sacred had to pass your mental vetting process before it could be real. The room begins to respond not visually, but emotionally. You feel a warmth in your spine, like an apology from the soul to the self. You didn't block yourself out of arrogance. You blocked yourself out of longing. You wanted the connection to be undeniable. You wanted the voice to boom from the sky. You wanted the goosebumps, the lightning bolt, the cinematic moment. But the Akashic field is a library of feeling. It's made of vibration, not volume. It never yelled. It whispered. And you, with your beautiful, scared, brilliant mind, kept turning the dial to prove it instead of let me feel. You stand now, not because something changed, but because you did. You understand the paradox. The proof you always wanted would never arrive until you stopped needing it. Faith isn't blind. It's sensory. It's learning to say, this feels like truth, even if I can't explain it yet. The room opens not in front of you, but inside you. You walk forward anyway, into yourself, into the quiet knowing. The next chamber hums low. A gentle message forms on the walls. Now we begin the part you never thought you were worthy of. You enter the next chamber without fanfare. There are no glowing doorways or floating symbols here, just a vast, open space filled with soft light that doesn't seem to cast shadows. It's quiet, but not empty. The silence feels like a listening presence, waiting for you to stop performing and start being. In the center of the space is a single wooden bench, aged but sturdy. You sit, not because you're tired, but because something inside you knows you won't be allowed to skip this part not anymore. This is where your soul finally gets a turn to speak. Not through rituals, not through signs, through you, raw, unfiltered, unearned. You wait for something profound, maybe a sentence to rise up fully formed. But what comes instead is breath, yours, steady, imperfect, alive. The soul speaks in breath first, not because it's poetic, but because it's the first thing you ever did when you arrived here. Your breath was your soul saying, "I'm here. I've arrived." But somewhere along the way, you started editing your soul's messages. You made them cleaner, more digestible, more polite. You trimmed the wild edges off your own truth in case someone misunderstood. You softened your rage so it wouldn't scare anyone. You dulled your joy so it wouldn't feel like bragging. You made your soul speak in lowercase so it wouldn't disrupt the room. But your soul isn't lowercase. It's thunder and whisper and ache and joy braided into a single thread. And all this time, it's been trying to say something simple. Please stop making me earn the right to speak. You feel it now not as a voice, but as a pressure rising in your chest. That thing you always swallow, that truth you postpone until the right time. That need to cry without knowing why. That burst of creativity you immediately dismiss because no one would care. It's all part of the message, and you've been redacting it like a government file marked classified. The light around you shifts slightly, not because you passed a test, but because you stopped resisting the lesson. Your soul isn't here to be impressive. It's here to be expressed. That includes the parts that feel too much, the parts that contradict, the parts that don't fit neatly into spiritual Instagram quotes. Your soul isn't a brand. It's a wild, luminous archive of everything you are and everything you're still becoming. You inhale, and for the first time in a long while, you don't immediately exhale out of habit. You hold it, let it settle, let it fill you, and then, when you release it, it carries something real, a fragment of the soul unfiltered. You don't need to write it down. You are the message. You always were, and now you remember. The light ahead forms a gentle path again, not forward, but deeper. You've stopped editing. You've started listening. Etched into the floor beneath you is a soft glow. The parts of you you've been hiding are the ones holding the wisdom. The path now curves gently downward into dimmer terrain, not threatening, just quieter. The warmth fades slightly, and you begin to feel the weight of your own footsteps. Not heavy in a burdensome way, but in a grounding one. Like gravity gently reminding you that yes, you exist, and yes, you're carrying more than you realized. The hallway narrows, then opens into a cavernous space with walls the color of deep ash and old bone. There are no torches, no glowing glyphs, just a low, constant vibration like the sound of something ancient breathing through stone. You know where you are before you even fully enter. This is the chamber of the shadow, the place you've been taught to avoid, but also the place where the records you keep trying to access were always waiting for you. The room doesn't frighten you not anymore. You've started to recognize that discomfort isn't danger, it's data. Your shadow doesn't lunge from the corners. It's already sitting in the middle of the space, waiting like an old friend who knew you'd show up eventually. It doesn't speak. It doesn't scold. It just exists gently pulsing with memories you've spent years trying to suppress, reframe, or spiritually bypass. Not because you're weak, but because no one told you your shadow was sacred. Everyone told you it was a flaw to be fixed, a distortion to be purged, but here in the center of the field, you see it differently. The shadow is not your brokenness, it's your archive. It has kept every piece you tried to throw away, every moment of anger, shame, grief, desire carefully folded and stored like love letters in a hidden drawer. You sit across from it, not for a showdown, for a reunion. And slowly, piece by piece, it begins to show you what it's been holding. That burst of rage you silenced in your throat? It came from betrayal, so old your conscious mind couldn't trace it. That jealousy you felt for no reason? It came from a timeline where you were always overlooked. That fear you keep trying to breathe through? It's not irrational, it's familiar. The shadow kept all these records because it knew your soul would need them later, not to suffer, but to remember how you became who you are. And suddenly, the room feels less like a dungeon and more like a vault, a sacred archive, your archive. The parts you thought were unspiritual are humming with sacred memory. Your shadow wasn't hiding from the light. It was waiting to be invited into it. You lean forward, and the shadow leans too. Not to merge, not to disappear, but to integrate. This isn't alchemy that erases. It's alchemy that acknowledges. You are not light or shadow. You are the field that holds both. A doorway appears behind the shadow not as an exit, but as a threshold. It leads into a space, neither light nor dark, but something in between, the place where integration becomes embodiment. Etched above the door is the message. Now that you've remembered, can you live it? You pass through the threshold into a space that feels eerily normal. No cosmic light shows, no pulsing stones. Just a quiet room with smooth wooden floors, filtered light coming through pale linen curtains, and the smell of something like sage and dust. It's a space you might have seen in a dream or in one of those peaceful spiritual retreat ads where people wear loose linen and try not to cry in public. But this one feels different, not curated. Just honest. You're no longer being tested. You're being asked a question on that isn't framed in riddles or ancient tongues. A single, wordless inquiry. Now what? Because now, you've met your shadow. You've felt the records, not read them. You've stopped editing your soul and remembered the language beneath your skin. But knowing isn't embodiment. Embodiment is where all of this stops being special and starts being real. It's when the mystical becomes mundane and the sacred becomes something you carry into traffic, into awkward conversations, into the checkout line at the grocery store, when the total is higher than you expected and your breath tightens in your chest. This is the part no one glamorizes. The part where you stop looking like a spiritual person and start being one. You sit cross-legged in the center of the room, not to meditate, just to feel yourself being here. No purpose, no performance, just presence. And it's harder than you thought. Because there's no reward for this. No cosmic pat on the back. No one watching to see how still your posture is. Just you and all the small resistances that rise up when you try to simply exist without effort. You feel the itch to get it right. To center yourself more. To focus on your breath. To feel something profound. But none of that is embodiment. That's performance dressed up in spiritual clothing. Embodiment is allowing your spine to slump a little. Letting the breath be uneven. Admitting that even here in this sacred in-between space, you're still a little restless. Still a little unsure. Still human. And that's not a flaw in your journey. That is the journey. Because all the mystical insights in the world mean nothing if they can't fit inside your normal, inconvenient, beautiful life. Embodiment isn't about glowing. It's about holding contradictions. Being both sacred and sarcastic, divine and disappointed, powerful and petty. You, all of you, lived out loud. The room shifts subtly. Not because you did something right, but because you stopped trying to do anything at all. That's when embodiment begins, when performance ends. You breathe without trying to deepen it. You sit without needing to improve it. And slowly, your body begins to hum not like a temple, but like a tuning fork returning to its natural frequency. You didn't find alignment. You remembered it. In the corner of the room, a mirror appears. Not glowing. Just there, waiting. Not for you to admire your progress, but for you to meet your reflection with nothing to hide. Inscribed softly along the bottom edge, "You are not what you've learned. You are what you choose to live now." You don't want to stand up right away. The mirror sits across the room like an invitation and a dare. It isn't ornate or gilded or mystical, it's just a plain rectangular mirror, the kind you might find in the corner of a modest home or dressing room. And yet, it feels like it holds more power than any vision you've had so far. Because this isn't a mirror that shows you your face, it shows you your frequency. The version of you that has always been there, beneath the apologizing, the pretending, the spiritual correctness, and the constant shape-shifting to make others more comfortable. This is the version you built 1,000 masks to hide from. Eventually, you rise not out of confidence, but out of inevitability. The closer you get to the mirror, the heavier your breath becomes. Not from fear, but from recognition. You know what's coming. You've always known, and still, your feet keep moving forward. The moment you stand in front of it, your heart lurches not because of what you see, but because of what you feel. The reflection doesn't smile. It doesn't perform. It simply stands there, tall and unashamed, radiating the vibration of a self that never needed to shrink. This version of you doesn't blink, doesn't adjust, doesn't soften the intensity in its eyes to make the moment more digestible. It stares back at you with the kind of raw clarity that makes your mouth go dry, not because it judges, but because it remembers. Every time you diluted your truth, every time you laughed at something you didn't think was funny, every time you held back your intuition in a room that didn't feel safe for the sacred, this version remembers on and forgives you instantly. Because hiding wasn't weakness, it was survival. You didn't avoid your true self because you were lost. You avoided it because no one ever told you it was safe to be found. The mirror doesn't show you your potential. It shows you your origin. Before the trauma, before the guilt, before the endless spiritual to-do lists. This version didn't evolve through enlightenment it endured. It waited. It kept humming beneath the surface while you chased validation in incense clouds and guided meditations. And now, it steps forward not through the glass, but into you. Not as a possession, as a merging. You are no longer becoming. You are returning. Tears rise, without a story to justify them. Just the soft shock of seeing yourself fully and realizing you're not disappointed. You're relieved. This is what embodiment looks like, not the glow, the grit, the gut-level intimacy with your own essence, the willingness to stop outsourcing your power to the next mantra or moon cycle. The mirror fades gently, not because it's gone, but because you no longer need a portal to access what's already inside you, inscribed into the air just before the room shifts. The self you fear becoming is the self you were born to remember. The room dissolves as softly as fog pulling back from a still lake, and you find yourself standing in a circular chamber made entirely of pulsing light. It's not blinding, but it's not subtle either. It moves like breath expanding, contracting, glowing, dimming. This isn't just decoration, it's your aura, projected around you like an atmosphere you forgot you've been wearing this whole time. And it's flickering not constantly, but enough to make you notice. Enough to make you wonder why it keeps short-circuiting. Why, just when you feel clear, powerful, in tune, everything sputters and you drop right back into confusion. You've blamed the planets, the food, the people. But the rune tells you this isn't about astrology or energy vampires. It's about you and the way you keep mismanaging your own voltage. You've been treating your aura like a decoration. Something to polish for ceremonies, charge with crystals, or make Instagram-worthy with affirmations. But you've also been neglecting it. You let it dim around people who can't handle your shine. You patch it up with spiritual duct tape when it rips in places you don't want to look at. You flood it with borrowed light from teachers and techniques that were never meant to replace your own current. And most of all, you overload it. With thoughts, with pressure, with a demand to be high vibe, even when your nervous system is begging for stillness. Your aura isn't just an energetic selfie. It's your boundary, your memory, your interface with the unseen. And every time you override your intuition for the sake of being polite, every time you dismiss a gut feeling in favor of logic, every time you say yes when you meant no, your field responds. It doesn't punish you, it flickers, not out of malfunction, but as a signal. You're stretching too far away from your center again. The light shifts now, swirling around you like a diagnostic. You see flashes of moments, subtle and recent. That phone call you took out of obligation. That one interaction where you felt your energy shrink but smiled through it. That night, you couldn't sleep, not because of caffeine or screens, but because your aura was buzzing with unprocessed truth. This isn't about guilt. It's about noticing. You're not broken. You're misaligned, and the solution isn't more effort, it's less pretending. You breathe deeply, and with every breath, the flickering slows. The more honest you are even just with yourself, the steadier your field becomes. The aura doesn't demand perfection. It thrives on congruence. You don't have to be happy. You have to be real. You don't need to be positive. You need to be present. Every time you tell yourself the truth, the circuitry stabilizes. Not because you fixed anything, but because you stopped lying to yourself in the name of being spiritual. The room begins to pulse in rhythm with your chest. You're not leaking energy anymore. You're sourcing it from truth. Etched into the walls around you, your light doesn't fail. It flickers when you forget who it belongs to. The pulsing slows, not into silence, but into coherence. You can feel it now, something you didn't have words for before. The moment when feeling becomes meaning, before language ever gets involved. You're not in a room anymore. You're in a resonance. It stretches in all directions, without walls, without symbols, without a single glowing glyph trying to impress you. Just hums, tones, frequencies brushing against you like the softest wind, delivering messages not to your ears, but to your marrow. This is where all communication begins, long before you say it out loud, before you write it down, before you even know what it is. The Akashic field doesn't use nouns and verbs, it uses vibration. And you're finally tuned in enough to feel what that means. For most of your life, you've been trying to figure out what you're sensing. Translate every feeling into a sentence. Turn every intuition into a message. But in doing so, you kept short-circuiting the transmission. Because you were taught that real knowledge has to be explained. You were told that unless it could be spoken, written, or at least understood, it wasn't valid. But energy doesn't wait for permission. It arrives fully formed. It imprints. It wraps around you like a coat you didn't know you needed, and only later do you realize, oh, that was a message. Here in this unspoken space, you remember moments. Not big revelations, just those quiet times when your body reacted before your brain did. When you walked into a room and felt the mood before anyone said a word. When you hugged someone and knew they were grieving even though they were smiling. When you felt your stomach tighten before agreeing to something that sounded fine but wasn't aligned. That wasn't intuition being dramatic. That was language. Not English, Not sound, energy. The first language. You float now not metaphorically, but in a literal sense. Your feet no longer need the ground to orient. You're suspended in this field, this library of meaning that doesn't rely on comprehension. You realize that every spiritual text you've read, every prayer, every chant, they were all just symbolic attempts to gesture at this. The real wisdom wasn't in the words. It was in the frequency they were trying to reflect. And you're a tuning fork. You've always been translating signals. You just didn't trust that feeling something was already receiving it. The field pulses once, gently. A new awareness settles in your chest. That truth often arrives long before understanding. And your job isn't to explain it right away. Your job is to live in it long enough for the language to catch up. You're allowed to know something and not know why you know it. You're allowed to feel certainty without context. That's not foolishness. That's fluency in the oldest language there is. Across the glowing air, the next space opens up. It doesn't call you. It waits for you to choose. Etched softly in the resonance itself. You were never confused. You were just translating too soon. You move forward, slowly. Not because you're hesitant, but because you finally understand you're not in a rush. The next space doesn't arrive with spectacle. It opens gradually, like a long-forgotten door you once closed yourself. You step through it and instantly feel exposed. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that's startlingly intimate. The walls are mirrors again, but not the kind that show your face or your frequency. These mirrors show your patterns. Not the polished version you tell your therapist about, the real ones. The ones you pretend you've outgrown but secretly repeat in slightly fancier ways. You instinctively brace for judgment, but none comes. The room doesn't accuse, it reflects, and that's somehow harder. Every time you think the Akashic field is here to grade you, it shows you something kindred, more uncomfortable. Not because it wants you to suffer, but because clarity is often more painful than condemnation. It's easier to believe you're broken than to realize you've just been misaligned. Easier to believe the universe is testing you than to admit you're living on autopilot. You see it now. That pattern you keep calling bad luck is actually just a lesson left on repeat. That relationship you said you grew out of was actually a blueprint you've been quietly copying with different names and better lighting. The field isn't laughing at you. It's offering you the full picture, the one your ego keeps cropping. And yes, it stings. Because you wanted to be further along by now. You wanted to be healed enough to not recognize this version of yourself. But here they are, still choosing safety over truth. Still shrinking to fit into rooms that don't deserve your presence. Still avoiding the very parts of yourself you swore you'd learn to love. The mirrors don't mock you, they hold you. And somehow, that's what cracks you open. Because being seen fully and not being punished for it reminds you what real transformation requires. The field doesn't judge your shadows. It simply doesn't edit them. And that's what makes it hard to face. It doesn't cater to your self-narrative. It shows you what's actually happening. No special effects. No spiritual spin. Just truth, pulsing like a steady drumbeat underneath your every decision. The reason it hurts isn't because the field is cruel. It's because you've built your self-worth on a scaffolding of half-truths, and now that scaffolding is dissolving. You don't collapse. You release. You breathe. You unclench your identity just enough to let something softer rise beneath it. Something more honest. You don't need to do better. You need to remember better. The mirrors begin to fade, not because the work is done, but because you're finally willing to keep seeing. And as you walk through the quiet exit, a message trails behind you like a whisper at the edge of sleep. You were never being punished. You were being shown where you left yourself behind. You walk into the next space slower than before, not out of caution, but reverence. You're tired not physically, but in that soul-heavy way that only comes from actually absorbing what you've seen. Integration doesn't feel like a high. It feels like a quiet reckoning, like waking up the day after a breakthrough and realizing the dishes still need doing. Like watching your own epiphanies collide with your oldest habits. Awakening was the flash. Integration is the wait. You thought the hard part was over when you remembered who you were. But remembering is easy compared to embodying that truth in places where you once forgot it. The room has no walls, no symbols, just space and gravity. You feel pulled into yourself, not metaphorically but somatically. Your body aches in places that hadn't spoken up until now. Your shoulders carry the echoes of years spent tensing every time you had to hold it together. Your jaw still clenches the way it did when you smiled through disappointment. Your gut still remembers every time you said yes when your intuition whispered, "Run." Integration isn't glamorous. It's slow. It's repetitive. It's being awake to your own reflexes and choosing differently, over and over again, even when no one's watching. You sit down not in lotus pose, just however your body decides. You don't need to look spiritual anymore. That performance died a few chapters ago. Now, it's just you, your breath, and the quiet return to your own nervous system. You're not here to ascend. You're here to land. That's the part no one told you. That integration isn't elevation. It's groundwork. It's messy. It's confronting. Because now, you know better. And that knowing doesn't let you lie to yourself the way you used to. Not comfortably. You remember that one relationship you kept in your life out of compassion. But it wasn't compassion, it was fear. You didn't want to be alone, so you called it patience. Now, when the same dynamic surfaces, you can't unsee it. You can't unfeel the misalignment. That's the ache of integration, the death of denial. And it doesn't come with applause. It comes with awkward conversations, with distance, with letting go of roles you used to perform so well you forgot they were roles. But underneath that ache, something else is growing. Something steadier, truer. The version of you that doesn't need a cosmic sign to trust your gut. The one that no longer treats boundaries like betrayals. The one that lets silence be sacred. Instead of rushing to fill it with spiritual jargon, that version isn't a future self. It's this self, now. Scarred, aware, and finally honest enough to begin living. A soft wind brushes your facino from outside, but from within. The feel doesn't need to speak here. You already know. This chapter isn't about learning, it's about becoming. Inscribed faintly in the air, only visible if you stop trying so hard. Truth doesn't always feel good, but it always frees what was locked inside you. You don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe it was during the shadow work, maybe when you stopped performing, or maybe when you finally let your breath exist without reshaping it, but at some point, the shift occurred. The field no longer feels like a place outside of you. It feels internal. Not in the way that's poetic or symbolic. You are it now. The hum, the glow, the memory, the movement, it's all inside you. You are the record, the recorder, the observer, and the observed. And that realization doesn't feel grand or heroic. It feels quiet. It feels like someone handing you a pen you forgot you were holding the entire time and asking gently, "Now what are you going to write?" This is the moment no one prepares you for. Not because it's hard, but because it's unfiltered. There are no steps, no mantras, no gatekeepers, no right way. Just an invitation to stop looking up and start looking inward. Because you're not the student anymore. You're the source. Not the source. A source. One of many. But yours is real now. Lived. Tested. Scarred. Honest. It doesn't shimmer with unattainable perfection. It hums with lived wisdom, like a sacred journal that's still being written in real time. You realize something else too. The Akashic Records were never a place to visit. They were a state to remember. And you can access that state not just in meditation or ritual, but in how you speak to a child, how you pause before reacting, how you choose presence instead of performance in a moment that doesn't ask for anything more than your honesty. Every gesture now imprints, every word vibrates, every silence holds potential. That's the real record. And you're writing it every time you choose to respond instead of react. Every time you feel something and don't turn away from it. You sit with this not because there's anything else to do, but because you finally trust stillness enough to let it hold you. You're not waiting for the next breakthrough. You're not hunting for closure. You're watching yourself take root in your own life. And it's the most sacred thing you've ever witnessed. There's a door behind you now. You hadn't noticed it before, probably because you weren't supposed to. You weren't meant to leave until you could walk out with your own frequency, fully intact, not borrowed, not mimicked, not half-lit. Yours. You walk toward it, not because you're finished, but because you're ready. The field doesn't vanish behind you. It integrates. Every step you take now echoes with the weight of someone who knows they're living as a record, not just reading from one. Etched gently on the doorframe in soft gold. As you pass through, you've accessed the records. Now live like someone whose life will be remembered in them. The moment you cross the threshold, the light doesn't dim, it shifts. It softens into the dull gold of an early morning you weren't expecting to witness. You are no longer floating through cosmic metaphors or deciphering sacred geometry by osmosis. You're in your body again entirely, but not in the way you were before this began. The world hasn't changed, but you're returning to it with a new calibration. Every sound seems fuller, every smell more layered. The floor feels real under your feet in a way that reminds you gravity isn't just physics, it's a form of belonging. You're not ascending, you're re-entering, and you're not the same. The noise of the world is waiting, but it doesn't hit you like a wave this time. It lands gently, like a familiar blanket you once outgrew. You recognize the patterns, the rush, the pretend smiles, the ambient anxiety that hums behind small talk and scrolling. But instead of falling back into it, you observe it from a different altitudione that doesn't make you better than anyone else, just more aligned with yourself. This isn't spiritual superiority. This is spiritual sobriety. You don't need to escape the world anymore. You just need to meet it from your center. People talk about going back to real life after mystical experiences as if the sacred only exists in the extraordinary. But now you know different. Real life is the ceremony. The rituals are everywhere if you remember how to see them. Making tea can be an invocation. Saying no can be an exorcism. Holding eye contact can be communion. You don't need incense to make something sacred. You need presence. And you've finally stopped outsourcing your presence to environments that feel more spiritual. You are the environment now. You catch yourself, briefly, wanting to explain it all to someone. To tell them what you saw, what you felt, what you've become. But then you remember some truths dissolve when spoken too soon. And some understandings aren't meant to be shared, just shown. In how you walk, in how you breathe, in how you show up for silence without needing to fill it. The people who are meant to notice will. And the ones who don't, that's not your concern anymore. You walk past a storefront window and catch your reflection. It's subtle, but undeniable. The posture, the gaze, the way your energy doesn't scatter when you look yourself in the eyes. You're not glowing. You're grounded. And that's rarer than light these days. You nod slightly at your reflection, not out of ego, but recognition. That version of you from the mirror back in the field? You didn't leave them behind. You brought them with you. A wind possess a real one this time. And for a moment, you swear it carries a whisper. This world doesn't need more awakened people escaping it. It needs more embodied ones walking through it awake. You're walking through the world now. Not levitating above it, not hiding behind sacred playlists or new moon rituals, just walking. Grocery aisles, sidewalks, conversations about nothing. And yet, something's different. You can still feel the field, not as a dramatic pull, but as a hum beneath everything. Like a hidden bass line in a song everyone else thinks is silent. You're tuned. And staying tuned doesn't mean you retreat every time the world gets loud. It means you let the loudness move through you without shaking your frequency loose. That's the real art no one teaches. Not how to awaken, but how to stay awake without becoming allergic to reality. It's easy to feel spiritual when you're meditating in candlelight with no deadlines. But can you hold your alignment when the emails pile up? When someone cuts you off in traffic? When your family forgets you're a human being and turns you into a projection again? That's where the tuning is tested, not in the stillness, but in the static. You find yourself in a coffee shop. The barista messes up your order, and for a split second, the old urge kicks in to roll your eyes, to sigh, to judge. But instead of reacting, you breathe. You remember. This moment is still part of the record. This interaction still vibrates. So you respond kindly, not performatively, not to feel like a good person, but because kindness now feels more resonant than sarcasm. You didn't suppress your reaction, you transmuted it. That's the tuning. That's the work. Staying tuned doesn't mean being high vibe all the time. It means being attuned to what's actually happening within you before you let the outside world rewrite your state. It means noticing when your energy starts contorting to match a room that's out of alignment. It means making micro adjustments, a shoulder roll here, a grounding breath there, a choice to say less instead of more. You're not checking out. You're checking in moment by moment without needing a cosmic excuse to justify it. You no longer see your spiritual sensitivity as a burden. It's not something that isolates you. It connects you to patterns, to shifts, to subtleties others miss. But now, instead of getting overwhelmed by those signals, you let them inform your pace. You move slower when the energy gets chaotic. You speak more carefully when the air feels dense. You take breaks before burnout becomes your only option. You're not reacting anymore. You're responding from a place of rooted clarity. Someone asks you later if you've been doing something new. You smile, not because you're about to give them a lecture on quantum embodiment, but because the truth is too simple to sound profound. You're just not tuning out anymore, and that alone is making everything else make sense. Etched invisibly into your day, barely perceptible except in how you carry yourself. Alignment isn't a place you visit, it's a presence you protect. You've spent chapters remembering, reconnecting, reclaiming. And now right when you thought the arc was complete, the field throws one last twist. The kind you weren't expecting. It asks you to forget. Not everything permanently, not in a dramatic amnesia sort of way, but to let go of the storylines, the frameworks, the mystical language, the maps you've been clinging to for clarity. To see if what remains underneath all of it is actually you, or just another costume sewn together from sacred terminology. This is the final test. Not whether you can remember your past lives or access subtle frequencies, but whether you can walk into a moment stripped of everything you've learned and still choose truth. At first, it feels like a betrayal. You worked so hard to remember, to retrieve, to reclaim, and now you're being asked to loosen your grip? But as you sit in this quiet, blank Spacino mirrors, no glyphs, no pulsing light, you begin to realize this isn't a loss, it's a reveal. When the scaffolding of meaning is removed, when you can't lean on language or symbols, what you're left with is the raw pulse of being. And it is enough. In fact, it's more than enough. It's all there ever was. You remember how much you used to rely on signs, on feathers, on number sequences, on whether your crystals felt charged. There's nothing wrong with those things, but now their absence doesn't feel like emptiness. It feels like space. And in that space, you feel something stronger than faith. You feel memory not of facts or visions, but of essence. You could forget every book you've read, every sacred name, every technique, and still know. Because the knowing was never stored in the content. It was stored in the connection. And that connection never needed words to begin with. You walk know again not metaphorically, but truly into your own life. Not with a script or a spiritual resume, just presence. And the world feels softer. Not because it changed, but because you're not fighting it anymore. You're not trying to decode every moment like it's a secret message. You're not trying to prove how aware you are. You're just aware. Quietly, calmly, fully. A friend asks you what you've been up to lately. You smile, you pause, you say, "Not much, just remembering." And they laugh, not knowing the weight of what you mean. But that's okay. You don't need to be understood. You don't need to be validated. You're no longer performing your path. You're living it. And somewhere, just beneath the surface of your ordinary day, a voice you no longer need to hear but always feel whispers. If you lost every tool, every mantra, every teaching, would you still act like someone who remembers? You don't answer with words. You answer by continuing to walk. It doesn't feel like a grand finale. No fireworks, no heavenly choir, no booming voice declaring that your spiritual quest is complete. It just feels like life, regular life. But something is undeniably different now. The colors don't seem louder, the air doesn't shimmer with some new mystic property, but your awareness has settled into the cracks of everything. You're no longer trying to wake up. You are awake. Not in some esoteric peak state, but here, in the gentle unraveling of a normal moment. The dream isn't gone, it's still playing all around you. But now, you see it for what it is. A dream you're inside of, co-writing, co-breathing, co-being. And for the first time, you don't want to escape it. You just want to live it well. The Akashic field doesn't fade. It integrates. You realize it's not something you access, it's something you embody. You don't need to go in anymore because it's with you. In the way you respond when someone's having a hard day. In the way you choose silence instead of defensiveness. In the way you pause before reacting, not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because your nervous system has recalibrated to peace, and that peace is louder than urgency ever was. You used to seek meaning in intensity, visions, breakthroughs, synchronicities that made your hair stand up. But now, meaning is subtle. It's in the way the light moves across your table in the morning, the way your breath returns to itself when you stop micromanaging it, the way your body feels safe in your own presence. That's the real awakening, not seeing angels in your dreams, but choosing kindness when your ego wants control. And you don't always get it right, but even your mistakes are gentler now. They're not failures. They're mirrors, reminders, opportunities. You still have bills. You still have noise. You still forget. But the difference is you remember again, quicker, without the drama. You don't spiral for days. You course correct in the moment. You come back to your center without needing a breakdown to get there. And that, truly, is the most sacred skill you've learned. There's no certificate for this, no divine stamp of approval. Just your own quiet knowing that you were never trying to reach something outside of you. You were trying to return. And now that you have, the dream doesn't control you. You're lucid. You can move through it not perfectly, but presently, and that's enough. You wake up the next morning, in your own bed, with the same ceiling you've always stared at, but it feels different. Not because it changed, but because you did. You don't need to be anyone new. You just need to be you, awake. Softly, just before your day begins, a final message settles into your bones. The dream didn't end. But you did. The illusion fell apart when you stopped trying to prove you were real. And from here, the record continues on breath. One choice, one lucid moment at a time. Now that you're walking through the world with this calm, almost boring clarity, something weird begins to happen. You start noticing that everyone is already tuned in to the Akashic Records. They just don't call it that. The cashier who hums the same tune every morning without fail, that's a frequency anchor. The old man feeding pigeons on a bench with such precision and rhythm it feels like prayer, that's unconscious ritual. The kid talking to her imaginary friend who's a golden dog made of clouds, that's access, unfiltered. Nobody is truly disconnected. They're just distracted. The channel was never broken. It was just drowned out by noise. You see it everywhere now, how every person is living inside their own forgotten archive, surrounded by signs they've trained themselves not to see. It hits you hardest when you're sitting on public transit. A woman across from you scrolls her phone with one hand, the other nervously tapping her thigh in a pattern. You watch her like a mystic might watch smoke signals. She's not conscious of it, but something in her is remembering, trying to soothe herself through movement, rhythm, repetition. You don't pity her. You recognize her. You used to do the same, maybe still do, in subtler ways. That's the sleepy secret of it all. We're not waiting to wake up. We're already dreaming the records, acting them out, one unconscious behavior at a time. Some talk of the Akashic field like it's an elite spiritual server farm only the awakened can tap into. But you know better now. It's not private, it's universal. It's as accessible as memory, as ordinary as muscle tension. It doesn't demand robes or crystals, just attention. And attention is the rarest currency these days. People pour it into apps, schedules, identity roles, never realizing that even their chaos is leaving a trail in the archive. The panic, the distraction, the self-doubt, it all gets stored. Not to judge, but to witness. You see now that you're not more spiritual than anyone else. You're just quieter. Quieter enough to notice. Your stillness doesn't make you superior. It makes you available. And because you're available, the field shows you things others aren't looking for. But here's the thing, it was never hiding. It was always singing, softly, beneath the surface noise. Most people just didn't know it was a song. You get off the train and step back into the street. Horns honk. Shoes slap pavement. Sirens groan in the distance. It's chaotic, but underneath it, you hear it again. The field, the hum. The background intelligence that holds everything in place. And you wonder not with judgment, but with curiosity. How many people around you are seconds away from remembering if only they'd pause? Inscribed in the noise of the city, inaudible but absolutely present. Everyone's in the records. Most are just playing a role so deep, they've forgotten they wrote it. So this is it. Not the end of the path, but the gentle turn at the edge of the map, the place where the trail stops trying to guide you and starts letting you wander. You're no longer hunting for escape. That impulse burned itself out, somewhere between the soul retrievals and the silent stares at your ceiling at 3 a.m. You're not trying to ascend, transcend, or expand your vibration anymore. You're simply living, but you're doing it differently. You're doing it like someone who knows they echo eternity, even if nobody else notices the sound. And the echo isn't loud. It's not thunder or fire. It's subtle. It's the way you hold a door open for someone who doesn't say thank you and feel peace anyway. The way you stop and let yourself feel instead of explain. The way you choose stillness over strategy. It's easy to mistake spiritual growth for theatrical change. New identities, new aesthetics, new jargon. But you know now, the real shift is so internal it's almost boring. You still have to do the dishes. You still forget passwords. You still get irritated by people who chew too loudly. But underneath all of that is a silence that wasn't there before. A hum of okayness. A sense that even when it doesn't make sense, it belongs. That nothing needs to be more magical than this. You're not the hero of this story. You're not the chosen one, or the prophet, or the reincarnated priestess. You're a node, a thread, a breath moving through a larger exhale. And that's sacred, too. The ego resists that at first it wants to be seen, acknowledged, honored. But eventually, you realize that being invisible doesn't mean you're irrelevant. It means you're free. Free to be the echo, not the announcement. Free to plant truth where nobody's looking. Free to radiate presence without begging for applause. That's the work now. Not to shine, but to resonate. You walk past a child blowing bubbles on a street corner. One floats toward you, iridescent and ridiculous. You don't swat it. You let it pass. That's the kind of person you are now, someone who lets things pass, who understands that not every moment needs interpretation, that sometimes the most spiritual response is a small smile and no words at all. You used to think you were here to learn, then to teach, then to heal. Now you know you're just here to be, to echo, softly, constantly, eternally. And you do. With every breath, every step, every choice that says, I remember who I am and I don't need you to. The records aren't behind you. They're not in front of you. They're you now. Living, forgetting, remembering, echoing, quietly. Always. Etched on the inside of your rib cage, never to be spoken aloud. This was never about escape. It was always about return. And with that, you close your eyes not to sleep, but to stay awake inside the dream.